basically, we have two major ad agency companies represented here, two of the world's largest, and a very savvy, radical, independent content producer. But I was wondering if you could all start off by just describing a little bit about what you do in the business, and specifically how you're trying to evolve advertising to its next iteration, its next form. So maybe, I know you have a couple of clips, but maybe we could start to my left with John and work across.
Great. Thanks for everybody for coming. It's great to see that much enthusiasm in the room. So hopefully we'll be able to cover enough ground tonight that you'll feel it was worth the price of admission. You know, I've been in the advertising business for a long time myself, and in 1993 I had this nagging feeling that the business was going to change, and I reinvented my company at the time, which had kind of a Brooks Brothers name to it, including mine, fortunately, and I reinvented the company as @radical.media in 1993 because I knew just enough to be dangerous that I saw the media landscape changing. This thing they called the internet was kind of coming. It wasn't there yet. It was still in its infancy, as it is today, as compared to what it is today. But more importantly, probably in panels not unlike this, there were people who were suggesting content was going to be king, and that as long as you produced something of meaning or had some value, that there'd always be a place for that. And I felt as if in our advertising business, if you're at all a student of history and you look back at the earliest days of television, a slightly confusing time when nobody really knew how to use television, just as we have only learned in the last 10 years or so how to utilize the internet, that the earliest days of television were single-sponsored programs, and mostly because there weren't enough sponsors who had stepped into the arena, and there was plenty of time and place for them to sometimes own or, as I say, singly sponsor that a show. But it was a time in which they built a very strong emotional connection with their audience. And it seemed as if it really paid off, because some of those brands that owned those shows back then are still some of the very lasting brands that we all support today in our purchases of their products. And in fact, in this most recent economic downturn, I'd asked somebody in the office about 6 weeks ago, and it's since been somewhat published in the likes of the Wall Street Journal, etc. If you look at the last depression, in the Great Depression, something like the soap opera was in fact invented by Procter & Gamble, not on television, of course, but on radio. And again, they emerged out of the Great Depression as the #1 leading packaged goods company to this very day. But it was through that relationship that they were able to build. So when we reinvented the company, we envisioned it as a company that would produce content, but that content, leveraging off of the business that we'd been in, would most likely be supported by advertising, as most programming, with the exception of a model like the HBO's offices we're in, is generally the rule.
Okay. I too saw that it was changing, and that even I'm old enough, I remember the beginning of cable network and the clutter, the beginning of clutter that caused, and then the internet, and now with DVRs, that the media landscape from the consumer perspective was fragmenting. And one of the, I'm not going to call it a casualty, but one of the main communication vehicles for advertising, the 30-second TV spot, was under duress, and viewers were paying less attention to commercials and had the opportunity not to watch them. And that began a trend, as John was saying, 10 years ago, where those of us on the advertising and media side saw the opportunity to look at TV and other entertainment properties, not to advertise around them, but to try to deliver messages in them. And sort of that began this world of what sort of evolved into sort of catch-all phrase of branded entertainment, where you can now, and again, I'm working from a place where, you know, millions, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on television, and it puts us in a position to leverage those dollars to put messages into shows like Top Chef and et cetera, and also to look at, you know, content that's developed and produced from the ground up on behalf of brands. And now, where I live, we don't live in the production world. We'll wait for guys like John to come in and Doug to come in with great ideas for our clients, and then build deals around them. So, sort of a convoluted way of talking about what I do.
Okay. Interesting.
Actually, I would love to come in and sell your show.
It'll be-
Except for he doesn't work for Omnicom.
It'll
so
be
he can't.
really interesting the day WPP can walk in the door of.
Honestly, you could, Doug.
I'd have to come in as Radical Media.
There you go.
You know, sort of to back up, give you a little background on myself. I got into this, I guess you could say, modern madman world, you know, as an entrepreneur, with over 15 years of entrepreneurial experience, going back to the launch of a magazine called The Red Herring in the early 90s, through the operating of a company called the Hollywood Stock Exchange, which some of you may be familiar with, which is a simulated stock market where you bought and sold movie stars and music properties based on real world values. And, you know, with technology and having been a casualty of Web 1.0, recognizing the two-way platform that technology provides, I really felt that branded content was a great platform to build brand messaging around. Every brand like Colgate or our client IBM has a story to tell, and more importantly, the engagement that you can create through storytelling allows a brand to make a connection with a consumer and build that long-term brand loyalty, which over time, with viral videos, you know, and social networks and a whole host of other tools that are out there, begin to engage the loyalist in a brand to become a, if you will, practitioner or a marketer for your brand. So shortly after I left Hypnotic, I worked very closely with gentleman Sean Combs, creating Diddy Runs the City for his brand, where he ran the New York City Marathon for New York City Public Schools. We launched the hybrid SUV for Ford Motor Company. And then after a brief stint at an IPG entertainment PR firm, was approached by Ogilvy to, in essence, form an entertainment division. Never thought I would go inside of a big organization, over 15,000 employees worldwide, 125 offices. But I felt that the challenge there was really rooted in our founder, David Ogilvy, who is, you know, probably by far the only true Madison Avenue brand today.
Okay. Well, if I heard all three of you right, I'm hearing the evolution of advertising. In fact, maybe a de-evolution. We're returning to the roots, right? We're going back to the original days where brand and content were integrated. But let me ask you all, in the original days of television, if you take the Texaco Star Theater or any of the great shows of the time, they were brought to you by, they were identified with the title sponsor,
Right.
and there were cast commercials within the programming. But they generally did not hijack the narrative. They were not integrated into the actual content.
You're right. Well, they sometimes did, but they did amazing things. We were just looking at a commercial, well, not a commercial, but a promotion for Winston cigarettes with the Flintstones. It was pretty amazing. I actually should have brought that along today. It's always a lot of fun to watch Fred smoking a cigarette with Barney, talking about how good these things taste and that they ought to let the ladies go do the work while they're sitting behind the rock wall having a smoke. A cartoon. Right. So there was some integration, but actually the value of something being brought to you by, I can remember as being like, gee, that's really swell of those nice folks at Texaco or any other brand that brought you something. And of course, part of it was the concept that television was free, and you accepted that the advertising that existed on television the thing that paid for the television. Now, I don't think with all of us having a cable bill and all of us, opting into premium cable or other places in which we can watch media now, it's perhaps lost its meaning quite a bit. And again, with the fragmentation of media and the commercial pods as they were created a little later in the really more around 1952, 1953, when Gunsmoke became a very popular show, and actually was a very popular show for 20-something years, that the concept of serial television, which was more expensive to produce, got people to come back every week, and they really liked the show because you never knew who was going to get thrown out of Dodge. But the thing was that it cost more to produce, and there was a fundamental shift then where brands that once owned entire shows were offered the opportunity to contribute a small amount towards the co-oping of the ownership of that show through commercial pods. And I don't know exactly how many commercials were crammed into a typical, well, probably in a 2-minute pod, which is all it was. They were probably 2 commercials, 2 60-second spots. But it's, of course, now typical commercial television as we watch it on any network is probably about 18 to 20 minutes of advertising.
And 44 minutes of programming.
44 minutes of programming in an hour show. And in 30 seconds, you could be looking at so many commercial messages. Who could possibly keep track of? Or why would anyone think how swell it is of any one of those brands being the person who's actually, or the brand that's brought you that show? So the appreciation is critical. And one of the things that, as we've expanded our business beyond the model of integration, because we really don't do that much product integration, but we do try to solicit single-sponsored programming. Iconoclast, the show that we currently have on Sundance, and it's in its 4th year, is singly sponsored by Grey Goose Entertainment. The last I looked, they make vodka. But they came to us 5 years ago, having heard we had been involved in some things like this, and there was a really great brand manager for Grey Goose at the time who realized it was important for them as a brand, as a luxury brand, to provide something that would be appreciated by their consumers. And 4 seasons later, we have a great series. There is no product integration at all, with the exception of a surprise to us. That's what one actor in one show happened to reach for in an episode, but that was clearly not planned. It is not about a cocktail. It is about a conversation between 2 people, and that model is something that we've replicated time and time again.